So, overall, this is a mediocre title at best. All it really does is further tarnish the reputation of movie licensed games as uninspired cash-ins with no redeeming qualities. Which, of course, we all know just isn't true. Just isn't true. So I suppose we should actually get around to doing that at some point, huh?
Stupid.
In 1933, RKO Pictures released King Kong, the world's first giant monster movie. It told the story of filmmaker Carl Denham taking his cast and crew on a... Look, you all know the story of King Kong. There's a giant gorilla, he falls in love with a woman for some reason. They take him back to New York and he fights planes on top of the Empire State Building. Literally everybody knows this film, even if they've never actually seen it. It was, for its time, considered a masterclass display of innovative special effects, even if they have aged about as well as the film's racial sensitivity.
Look, son, me find on deck. Native bracelet. Crazy black man been here.
Ooh, I'm not touching that one with a 30-foot gorilla. 70 years after the film's initial release, Lord of the Rings director Peter Jackson would give us all his own take on the story with his 2005 remake, starring Naomi Watts, Jack Black, and Adrian Brody. Jackson's version of the film was a 3-hour-long blockbuster full of epic CGI fight scenes, breathtaking landscapes, and random frame drops. It was, for its time, considered a masterclass display of innovative special effects, even if they have aged about as well as the film's racial sensitivity. Wait a minute. Regardless of what you think of the film or how its effects have aged, it is Oh, what is this? The film was undeniably popular, with critics raving over everything from the special effects to the many homages it paid to the original 1933 classic. I do remember back in 2005 seeing a lot of Kong merchandise in all the shops. Mostly toys, playsets, plushies, action figures. They were heavily marketing towards kids. Which is funny considering how viscerally upsetting the film could be at times. Even I wasn't immune to the apparent Kong mania back then. I distinctly remember owning a little plush Kong with metal wire in his arm so you could make him do all kinds of cool poses. God, I loved that toy so much. And then when I was bored of him, I nailed him to a tree because I'm a fucking psychopath. But as with all successful movies until about 2008, a video game adaptation was made to tie into the film. King Kong the game was developed and published by Ubisoft for the PlayStation 2, GameCube, Xbox, and PC. There were also handheld versions available, but they were a bit, you know. Oh, sorry, did I say King Kong the Game? Oh, that would have been a sensible title. No, what I meant to say was Peter Jackson's King Kong, the official game of the movie. Yes, that is actually what this game is called. It's on the spine and everything. Could you imagine if other games had titles like this? You know, you sit down to play a nice wrestling game on the PS1, so you pull out Vince McMahon's WWF SmackDown 2, the official video game of the sports entertainment show. I kid, of course, but it is just somewhat funny to see this game sitting on my shelf with its title on 2 separate lines. I mean, there's literally only one other game on my shelf that does that, and it's... Oh no. No, you go back where you came from. You can fucking stay there. Booting up the game, you're immediately hit with its eerie and unsettling atmosphere as early as the title screen. The dark, silhouetted Skull Island sits in the distance, shrouded by a dense fog. The helpless and isolated boat you arrived on is rocked back and forth by the unforgiving stormy seas. And the whole scene is strangely quiet, with nothing but the sound of the waves undercut by the game's subtle soundtrack. Ooh, it gives me the chills, I tell you so. This title screen, as far as title screens go, is fantastic. It tells you pretty much everything you need to know about Peter Jackson's King Kong, the official game of the movie. This scene is actually where the game begins. Unsurprisingly, really. I highly doubted they would have included much of the film from before the characters actually got to the island. Unless, of course, they made a Pac-Man clone where Carl Denham had to escape from the police. But believe me, I've played more than enough Pac-Man clones for the rest of my life, so I'm pretty fucking glad they didn't do that. As one would expect from a movie tie-in game, Peter Jackson's King Kong, the official game of the movie, follows the plot of the film, though it does so rather loosely. The general events of the movie are retold more or less beat for beat, but a lot of the actual details are very different. Certain scenes play out completely differently, some story elements have been moved around, and there are entirely new sequences added just for the game. likely to lengthen playtime of course, but all of these differences combine to make the game feel very set apart from the original movie and give it somewhat of an identity of its own. That being said, the developers evidently worked very closely with the art team of the film because the game reflects the visual style of the movie almost perfectly in my opinion. That and the fact that several actors from the film also lent their voice talents to the game only further serves to bring the two worlds closer together. And then they kiss. So it's sort of in this weird state where it feels like it belongs to the Peter Jackson movie, while also very clearly being its own take on the story. Almost as if two people wrote their own versions of King Kong and both films were made at the same time, sharing cast and locations. Similar in some respects to the 1931 Dracula films, where Universal made a Spanish version at the same time they made the English one, just swapping out the cast and crew. You know, except with a gorilla. The story is, I guess, partially told through cutscenes. However, unlike the Incredibles game, which featured clips taken straight from the movie, P.D. Jackman's Big Ape, the proper plaything of the film and like, has its own special pre-rendered cutscenes which play in between each level. But they're just weird. Jerky, blurry, with far too much bloom, and for some reason they're in this absurd widescreen that isn't even centered properly. Seriously, what is up with this ridiculous aspect ratio? It's like 21:9. What is this? Cinerama? The game is divided up into levels where you play as either Adrian Brody's character Jack Driscoll or as King Kong himself. The levels where you play as Jack have you trudging through the jungle, solving puzzles and shooting giant bugs, while in the Kong sections you just kind of play as a giant gorilla. Focusing on the Jack levels first, as they are the majority of the game, you start off on a small rowboat on its way to Skull Island before being knocked overboard by some falling rocks. You wake up on the island with Darrow apparently trying to compare nostril sizes with you. Get away! I don't want it! Nah! And then have to make your way through some dimly lit caves where we encounter our first enemies. Not that I can actually tell what they are, but they're probably bad things. Now, when they said this game was dark, I didn't know they meant it so literally. Ha! I can't see a fucking thing. When you can, actually see. The gunplay in this game is alright. Not perfect by any means, but certainly not bad for the GameCube with its little yellow nipple. Which is good, because when Jack isn't opening big wooden doors or burning the indigenous flora, he's slaughtering the local wildlife with a wide array of weapons. Centipedes, scorpions, the Krillitane, there's nothing old Jack won't kill. Except for Carl Denham. He won't die, unfortunately. No matter how much I try. There are a total of 4 different usable firearms in the game, all of which you find in the supply crates dropped by Engelhorn's seaplane. A pistol, a shotgun, a sniper rifle, and a Tommy gun! However, due to the limited ammunition available, you will more often than not be forced to rely on whatever you find in the jungle, namely spears and sticks. Now, the spears are the MVP of this game. They're extremely powerful and feel great to use, but are sadly also limited. You only get a couple at any one given time, and once they break, they're gone forever. But the game also gives you an alternative in pointy sticks, which you're able to keep taking infinitely from these convenient piles of bones? Oh god, these are actually bones, aren't they? So even if you run out of bullets and spears, you can always rely on a handy source of low damage projectiles if you're in a tight pinch. And believe me, you don't even want to try using your fists to fight anything. It seems to be entirely ineffective and after a while would probably just hurt your hand, so don't do that. The game also gives you the ability to use bait as a combat tactic. There are sections where important puzzle items are blocked by swarms of giant spiders which you can't actually kill for some reason, and instead have to be coaxed away with food, usually these giant grubs. But early on in the game, you're also shown that enemies will often stop attacking you if a dead enemy is nearby.
Did you see that? All the species on this island eat each other.
So, if you put 2 and 2 together, you get 4. You learn that you can keep threats away from you by selectively killing certain enemies or by simply using the already available bait. This gives you the chance to either quickly move around them or get in a few cheap shots while their back is turned. Similarly, certain enemy types such as bugs and dinosaurs will naturally aggro on each other and start fighting, which you can also take advantage of. I learned fairly quickly to use my environment to my advantage. I need to burn these thick brambly bushes in order to move past them, but enemies can go straight through. Knowing this, I can strategically set fire to the bushes when I know enemies are coming, thus clearing the way, killing the enemies, and saving me any ammunition I may have used fighting them. On a side note, during the game, if you're low on bullets, or if you press Y, Jack will give you an update on how much ammunition he has left.
3 magazines on backup. 4 magazines on backup. 2 magazines on backup. 4 magazines on backup.
Now that's all very well and good, but put yourselves in my shoes, playing this game as a child, growing up as many kids in Britain did. British. I knew sod all about guns, so when he said the word magazines, I literally thought he meant magazines. Yep, throughout my entire childhood playing this game, I thought that Jack was fighting his way through the jungles, barely staying alive, blasting every bug he could see, while also somehow reading his way through the latest copy of GQ. Männer des Jahres, was zur Hölle? Throughout the game, you'll traverse levels with a wide variety of AI-controlled companions, such as Mr. Hayes, Ann Darrow, and Carl Denham, just to name most of them. I'm personally a big fan of this because they're not just there to keep you company, they'll pick up weapons and lend you a hand in combat whenever they can. This also means you'll have to protect them from time to time. Some companions are better at keeping themselves out of trouble, such as Mr. Hayes, whereas others like Carl basically need to be under 24-hour supervision lest they be mauled to death by a giant centipede. Who you travel with is dependent on what level you're playing, and sometimes you can even be entirely on your own, and this is where I find the game is at its scariest. Yes, I know this isn't technically a horror game at all, but need I remind you that I don't normally do scary games, so the bare minimum creep factor this title has is more than enough to have me feeling uneasy. I mean, let's be honest, it doesn't really take much to scare me. Sometimes I'm even scared by opening my own front door. Then again, I do live opposite a haunted murder clown factory. It's not an ideal location, but the rent was cheap. The point is, this game can be quite scary at times, especially for younger players or those of a nervous disposition. What'd you call me? The game can be both metaphorically and literally dark. The enemies will often swarm you, and there is a great sense of isolation the deeper into the jungle you go. There's also some great moments where, due to being able to hide from dinosaurs inside temple ruins earlier in the game, you think you're safe doing it again later on, only for the dinosaur to suddenly knock the structure down and completely ruin the inside of your pants. There's a lot of little touches in this game I really appreciate, like the level transitions, or the banter between the characters, or the way the game pays homage to Jackson's artistic use of low frame rates in the movie by having them feature in the game. Oh, wait. One thing I did absolutely love was that during levels with Carl Denham as a companion, he'll just randomly stop what he's doing, whip out his camera, and film stuff. It was such a clever and hilarious moment that makes total sense for the character, and I laughed every time I noticed it. Though I gotta say, I do often wonder what Carl's footage actually looks like. So you know what, let's take a look. Let's see what the artistic genius mind of Carl Denham was able to capture with, say, this shot. Yes, let's have a look at the footage captured from this shot. Cinematic masterpiece, 5 stars, 10 Oscars, a Nobel Film Prize, and a Slammy. Aside from the fact that Carl Denham is a shit film director, this game also reveals another terrible revelation. A dark secret, if you will, that if uttered to the wrong people, could shake the very foundations of Western civilization itself, sending thousands, nay, millions of lives into complete disarray. And that is that Carl Denham is a stick-stealing bastard. Seriously, every time I need a weapon, Carl will just run in and take the last spear, or yet even worse, steal my stick that I just put down for a moment to get ammunition or do a puzzle. Sometimes he'll even go and steal spears that I've thrown into enemies, leaving me completely defenseless while he stops to film the action. And then, just to add insult to injury, he'll drop the spear and cause it to despawn. Why'd you need the spears so much, Carl? Isn't your camera's tripod enough? You're not even that good with them! Stop stealing my sticks, you untalented prick!
If you're gonna take my stick, do me the courtesy of actually killing me.
I suppose now would actually be a good time to talk about the other half of Peter Jackson's Königking das offizielle Spiel des Films. After trudging through the muddy and hostile jungles as Jack for nearly 2 hours, you finally get to play as the man of the hour. No, not Leo Rush. I'm talking about... Yes! yes, it's time for the big ape himself, King Kong. I quite like these sections of the game, especially when it's just a straight up fight, because Kong is a joy to play as, although he does take some getting used to. Now, a lot of people I see play this game online all have the same complaint, that Kong is incredibly button mashy, that there's no real strategy to his combat, and all you do is hit the A button until you win. Well, I'm here to tell you that's just not true. Kong doesn't have a particularly deep moveset, no, but it's more than just hitting A repeatedly. Yes, that will do a basic combo, but did no one ever think to press the other buttons? Y does an upwards thrust, and following that with A makes Kong immediately slam his arms down for a powerful stun attack. You can also perform a dash attack by pressing B right before you hit A, and did nobody honestly try grabbing anything with X? Aside from cleaning house with a fallen tree, you can literally beat a motherfucker with another motherfucker. Like I said, it's not the most in-depth moveset, we're not looking at Shulk here, but it's still incredibly fun to play with and not button mashy at all in my opinion. I think one of the reasons a lot of people didn't really know about all of Kong's moves was that, well, the game doesn't really tell you. Honestly, the game barely tells you anything. There's no HUD except for a small ammo counter in the Jack levels, no health bar, no minimap, no nothing. And don't get me wrong, I'm glad the game doesn't hold my hand all the way through. I'm genuinely quite happy it let me figure some stuff out on my own. But maybe it could have told me the basic controls? You know, so I actually know what button to press in order to do things. The controls aren't even listed in the pause menu, so you just kind of have to hit random buttons and see what they do. I mean, thankfully there's only at most 7 to work with. God forbid I brought this game on PC and had to sit there pressing every single key on my keyboard until something happened. Oh, a semicolon. These levels are really where you can see the game's cinematic influence come into play. The camera will shift around to get all kinds of different angles during fights or puzzle sections. My personal favorites are where you can see Anne in the foreground or background while you're fighting. It's a great way of eliminating the need for all the HUD elements this game seems to be so against. In any other game, Anne would probably just be off screen and have a health bar to let you know how long you have until she dies. But by having her in view the whole time, it makes the danger she's in feel more immediate and stops you from just going, oh, they're fine, they've got like 3/4 of their health left. Kong isn't perfect though, his mobility leaves a lot to be desired, especially his climbing and jumping. You do get used to it, but there's no getting around the fact that his movement controls kind of suck. He moves incredibly slowly, and the delay you get from pushing the climb or jump button to Kong actually doing anything can leave you just flailing about the stage uncontrollably while you're getting your ass handed to you by a giant leech. I find the level designs themselves are also quite restrictive. Due to Kong's size, there's not really a whole lot of area to move around in, making his levels feel almost on rails at points. That, coupled with his terrible jumping and barely responsive climbing, can make sections where you're not just straight up fighting a V-Rex feel like a huge waste of time. Yes, V-Rex, not T-Rex, completely different species. And to explain the paleontological difference between the two, here is successful YouTuber and close friend, Steven of Red Scott Gaming.
It's a movie.
But alas, it appears as though we're approaching the final act of Petrus Jackson's Rex Kong et ex publica ludum elit, and I'm sure we all know how the story goes from here. Eventually, Kong is subdued with chloroform and is somehow shipped back to New York, where he is unveiled to the world before breaking free from his chains and going on a rampage in the city. The final 2 stages, both taking place in New York, are interesting ones to say the least. To go from the lush and varied jungles of Skull Island to city is a bit of a letdown, to be honest. The climbing is just as broken here as it is in the rest of the game. In fact, I think it might actually be worse. And yes, while throwing cop cars around is really fun, I think it would be more fun if I actually knew where I was supposed to go. All these streets look the same and it's pretty easy to get lost, at least it was for me. Oh, okay, now you're gonna tell me the controls on the second to last level. Well, gee. Thanks, game, but if I didn't know how to move objects out of my way now, I don't think I would have been able to get to this point. What do you think you're playing at? Peter Jackson's Oh god, I'm not even going to try that one. Kong eventually meets back up with Anne. They skip the whole ice skating scene, thank god. They climb to the top of the Empire State Building, and Kong has his epic final showdown with the airplanes. The planes keep respawning, and the section only ends once, well, you die. So while playing it is ultimately futile, Kong does take down several planes with him in the movie, so who am I to argue with canon? And boy, let me tell you, I'm pretty sure I broke a record. How many planes did Kong destroy in the film? Pfft, you are like little baby. Watch this. Eventually, as we all knew he would be, Kong is overwhelmed by the planes and is shot down. His body falls from the tower, landing in the streets below, and as crowds gather around him, Carl Denham appears and delivers his powerful ending line.
It wasn't the airplanes. It was beauty killed the beast.
Thank you, Carl. Beautifully delivered, as in the film, with your stupid, gormless face staring into absolutely, probably looking at a goddamn hot dog stand. Kong was emoting more and he's fucking dead. So that was Peter Jackson's King Kong, the official game of the movie. So how did it hold up? Well, in all, I think this game was pretty good, especially taking into account that it was a movie tie-in, which are usually guaranteed to be utterly terrible. While certainly not perfect, it set out to do two things: first-person run and gun, and third-person guerrilla simulator, and in my opinion it did both of those things competently. Some of the puzzles were a bit tedious, and Kong's mobility was fairly restricted, but PJ's KK, the OG of the MV, was still a decently built game overall. The levels by and large weren't confusingly laid out, difficulty increased naturally, and in terms of glitches, well, there wasn't really much that stood out to me or caused me any real issues. Well, except this one time when Jimmy got twatted by a dinosaur into the scenery and was completely stuck and unable to come help me open a door. That was a bit shitty. But that did only happen once, so I think we can let it slide. The game also features a whole bunch of awesome extra content to unlock, such as this really cool art gallery that you get to walk around in like a museum. Or this fascinating interview with Peter Jackson where he talks about working on the game, his relationship to the original King Kong movie, and he even speaks briefly about playing Beyond Good and Evil and how it led to him teaming up with the game's designer Michel Ancel to work on this game. There's also at least 2 new modes to play the game in, 2 that I could unlock anyway: Old Movie Mode, which turns the game sepia, and Horizontal Flip, which as the name suggests, mirrors the entire game world. And I mean, if you needed another reason to replay this game, well, how about beating everyone else's high scores? But wait, how is there a leaderboard if the GameCube wasn't online? Unless... Hey! Thanks for watching. Sorry for taking so long to get the first review of 2019 out. I know it isn't ideal, but I promise you I got a ton of cool stuff coming up real soon. So don't yous go nowhere. My question of the day is, who is your favorite giant monster? Or kaiju if you're a big fucking weeb. For me, I'd probably have to say Braun Strowman. If you like this video, please remember to give it a like, comment, subscribe, and share it with your friends. And don't forget you can follow me on Twitter @TheTransHeel. I've been MayRey, and I'll see you all next time. While we're on the subject of gorillas, Chunky Kong is a fucking abomination.